One of the biggest fears that small businesses have is loss of control over their data, the fear that it won't be safe anymore. Connor, as CEO of a company that actually handles that sort of problem, what do you say to those customers?
Well, how much control do they currently have? Is it backed up? Where is it backed up? And most people are using online backups of some description, so already their data is in the cloud, or it's on tape sitting somewhere. How safe are those tapes? It's the same question, and it's answered in the same way.
And what about the fact that with Microsoft, I suppose, they actually have the backing of a very large company with all its processes?
Clearly that, most small organisations could not implement the kind of processes and backup strategies that a large organisation like Microsoft would put behind it. And also Microsoft's reputation is on the line. So they have a very vested interest in making sure your data is 100% safe.
And Simon, for you, can you answer the query, where does the data actually live?
So within, say, Microsoft Office 365, it lives in Microsoft's very secure data centres. But probably the most important thing about that is that the data is actually stored in multiple locations within those data centres. So should one particular component of the data centre fail, the data is still okay.
And what control do I still have as a small business owner?
Well, it's very much the same as you would have today. You can manage your users through Office 365 using, say, for example, Active Directory. So you can have exactly the same level of control that you do in your current environment.
Now, David, you actually are a director of a small business yourself, and you switched to the cloud. Do you have any fear yourself about the security of your data?
Personally, no. I mean, as Connor has said, I mean, if you're talking about a small business, what normally happens is somebody accidentally becomes the IT manager. And when that person is accidentally doing the IT management, they're probably not concentrating on it fully. They're doing some other job at the same time. I'd much rather have a dedicated, focused company which is experienced in these things, backing up my data in multiple redundant places, and that doesn't worry me at all. It takes away the extra risk factor as far as I'm concerned.
And how can you actually trust them? How can you trust the cloud vendor that you're placing all that data with?
Well, there's a bunch of ways of doing that. If you look at the processes that they're using to run their data centres, that's one particular thing. The next one is to see what kinds of certifications and attestations they have around their data centre, and those are also generally published by all the vendors.
So what sort of keywords should I be looking for there?
So keywords, things like ISO 27001, things like SAS 70, those kind of numbers which actually are indicative of a particular certification being held by that vendor. And on top of that as well, look for really good access controls. Make sure that there is a process around identity and around authentication.
A lot of small businesses are worried about the Patriot Act, the perceived ability of the US government to come in and take their data, to look at their data. What do you say to the companies who are worried about that?
The US Patriot Act allows the US government access to data for the investigation of terrorism or espionage. In order to get access, they have to follow a legal process and provide substantive proof that they require access to the data. And once they're granted that, then the judge that's doing that granting has to then put a framework in place that governs what the government can do with that data. So that protects against things like perhaps people are worried about industrial espionage or something. That's something that just cannot happen under US law. There's also other acts around the world which are very similar. Something in the UK called RIPA allows the UK government to access data in a very similar way. And actually governments interact with each other around this because essentially this is around protecting us against terrorism. Generally, most businesses aren't going to be worried about the Patriot Act. It's kind of a misnomer that's thrown out there around cloud, and it's not really something to worry about. It's far more important to actually look at the trust that you're placing in the cloud vendor and to make sure that they are putting in the right kinds of controls.
And what other measures can you put in place, or should people put in place?
In my experience, if people in small businesses, if people are already using a BlackBerry, then their data is already floating around the world. So it really doesn't come up that much. In my experience, anybody using a BlackBerry, already their data is around the world. Are small businesses really that concerned? In general, no, unless they have something to do with around compliance or around health and holding health records. Then there is an issue, but there's systems already in place for that. So.
And does it actually help in any way for compliance because you are partnering with Microsoft?
Well, you do know that the data centers are being run under a strict set of governance, so you do have that particular backup.
So what would you say to David if he was on the verge of moving to the cloud, but he wasn't quite sure about it because he was worried about security? What would you actually say to him?
Understand the data, understand what it is that you're placing into the cloud. Are you putting in personal information about people? If you are, then think about things like the Data Protection Act and your requirements under that particular part of the law. But basically, just understand the data.
David, does that reassure you?
It does, yeah. I think there's a perceived risk with moving things to the cloud, and as Connor's just pointed out, we all send text messages all the time which are business critical, and we don't worry about those. And I think certainly, if you're talking about internet traffic and web traffic that's encrypted with HTTPS, then there's far less chance of it falling into the wrong hands than there is with a simple text message. So yeah, I think from my point of view, I'm not particularly worried about that. I can see how people would be, but I think it's more of a perceived risk, and it's more hype than substance.
And Connor, I'll give the final word to you. What would you do? What words would you use to persuade the small business out there that not to worry about the data security, but just to press ahead anyway?
I would just say that an organisation of Microsoft's scale and size has again a vested interest in making sure that its service isn't compromised, and they would spend vast amounts of money in comparison to any SMB to be able to implement those procedures. You've just got to think about, as we mentioned already, backups. What do you do currently about backups? Where do you stick it currently? Is it sitting on a tape? Well, 70% of most data losses actually happens from internal people taking your data, not external. So again, perceived risk. Is it real? Maybe not so much for most businesses.
Okay, everyone, thank you.